In this session, we're going to take a look at the individual parts of a software requirements specification. As you remember from the last video, there are two main parts to an SRS, the overall description and the specific requirements. So what we're going to do now is take a look at how each of these elements work together to form the software requirements spec. The overall description has three main parts. First, it has a brief description of the software. So here we're going to tell what product will be produced, and we're going to give a little bit of background about why we're writing this code. So usually it's quite easy to say what it is we're going to write. Sometimes it's a little more difficult to explain why. In many cases when you're at school, you're going to be writing a program because you're asked to write it. But once you get out into industry, it might be a client coming with a particular problem that they want solved. It might be you thinking up an app that you want to write. You always wanted something to do a particular task, so you decide to write it. And this background will explain that. The next section is a definition of the blocks that are going to exist within the system. So we start by doing a block diagram, a very simple one, very high level, that identifies the major elements that have to be accomplished in this. Usually input, some form of processing, and some output. Then a very brief description of what each of those major blocks that you put in, a description of what they do. One sentence is enough here. Then some qualifying information. We want to describe, first of all, who the typical user is. It might be a very experienced computer user, or it might be an app for someone who is not at all comfortable using computers. The way we convey information, the way we expect to get information from those users is going to be very different. So it's very important you identify who your audience is. The last thing that we're going to see in the overall description is a list of things that might inhibit our success. So it might be time constraints, it might be equipment constraints, it might be people constraints. There are a number of things that might interfere with the progress of a project, and so we're doing a little bit of a risk analysis here. The specific requirements section comes next, and in here there are three main parts. The first is a description of how our program is going to interface with the real world. Then our smart requirements, which, as I said before, is probably the most important part, and then the Moscow list that accompanies the smart requirements. So let's take a look at the interfaces first. So we need to consider first is if there are users that are going to be using this, how are they going to interface with our program? Is it going to be a standard keyboard and screen? Is it going to be a tablet interface? Or is there no user interface at all other than starting the program? Maybe all the information is coming from data that has been collected previously by other programs, and this program is simply going to take that data in, number crunch it, or analyze it somehow, and spit some results out the other end. So maybe our information is coming from files, and if so, what format are those files, and what do we need to do to get the information from them? Or maybe our system is some software that's going to control a physical system, in which case we have sensors monitoring things, and we have things like motors and drivers that are controlling things. How do we interface with those? So we need to be very clear right up front how we're going to interface with the things that we need to interface with. The smart requirements are things that are measurable. These are things like performance, data, reliability, speed, time, accuracy, precision. Oh, we got speed in there twice. Ranges of values. So we're going to talk about things like the platforms that we're going to use. We're going to talk about the data that the user would be entering and what the valid ranges are for. We're going to talk about how precise our output is going to be, what the accuracy is going to be for our calculations. All those kinds of things need to be written very specifically so that at the end we can come back and measure against those to see if our program's doing what it's supposed to do. Once we have each of those written, we're going to look at each one individually and say, must I do this? Should I do it? Could I do it? Or won't I do it? In each case, we identify with the letter M, S, C, or W how that requirement that's been specified here is going to be integrated into our system. So we have our overall description and our specific requirements, and that makes up our software requirement specification. In the next section, you'll be able to see an example of how one comes together.